special.
Not for the recording. All right, so, couple things. First, I want to tell you that over the course of the day, you have heard from, on this stage, 2 current Anderson students. Who were they? Right? Bonus at the reception if you can figure that out. Second, I just want to encourage those of you who are here, you're welcome to kind of fill in seats that are closer to the stage. You don't have to kind of stay spread out in the back and all sorts of stuff. As we get towards the end of the day and start creeping up towards our game changer conversation, all that other stuff, you know, come in, fill in, get close, it's all good. Third, I want to welcome you to this is my last conversation of the day and the one I've been looking forward to the most. We're going to be talking about people, inclusion, representation, and so on. So I would introduce everybody individually. In the interest of time, I'm going to start with each person with a question. So I'm going to start with Mika, who's right here to my left. Mika, you've had an interesting career journey. You weren't always in entertainment. In fact, I think you wanted to go to med school. Can you talk a little bit about how we went from med school hopeful to doing what you do now?
Okay, so I will start, because I'll probably reference this anyway. Jay Tucker, it's very hard for me to not call you Mr. Tucker, was my computer teacher growing up in New York City. So I've known him since I was 9 or 10 years old. Yes, you have met my parents. I'm first generation. They are not interested in entertainment by any means, nor were they at that point. I loved it, read the TV guide when it would come like the Sunday paper. I would go to like King's Video on like Union Square. I just did all that stuff growing up, in addition to like liking maths and sciences and all that sort of stuff. You know, in college, I actually convinced them that it was okay for me to major in film so long as I remained pre-med, because I was just sort of like, you can major in anything and still be pre-med, like it didn't really matter. And so I did that, and then after college, they were not interested in hearing I did not want to go to med school, and so we didn't talk for 2 years. That's its own thing. They love me very much. It's fine. I'm successful now. But at the time, it was hard. At the time, it was hard. Yeah, I interned throughout New York City. Morgan Spurlock, Screen Notes, all these things, and then I applied to the START program at USC. Went to grad school there and sort of worked my way up. But yeah, it was, I've always sort of had a very vested interest in content, movies. You know, my grandmother used to call me TV Guide because I would read it like a book when it came. I sort of have loved movies all my life. Just needed to sort of work with the courage to convince my parents there was a path there as well.
So again, we're talking about inclusion and representation. And one of the theories I'm going to throw out there right now just harkens back to what Cece was saying earlier, which is that there's an even distribution of talent, but not necessarily an even distribution of opportunity. And yet you have 3 women on stage right now who actually turn their opportunities into significant, success. And it speaks to their talent and their drive and their hard work and all that other stuff, which is why I asked them to come speak to you. But Mika, I know that it wasn't an easy journey. Parents talking to you notwithstanding, can you talk about a moment when you learned a lot?
Yeah, I can think of a few moments like that. There was a moment, there was a moment in my career very early on. I was someone's assistant, and I was, very type A. I really wanted to do the best that I could. It's how you, all these assistant situations are basically apprenticeships. It's not rocket, it's not medicine, right? It's like the opposite of, but you're still trying to prove yourself to your boss. And there was a moment where I was doing everything right. I was reading everything. I was like, man, my boss is just not interested in what I am saying. It felt like he only wanted to talk to me about, you know, Tom said, I was like, I don't, like, that's not what I'm trying to do here. Like, you know, I was trying to engage in another way. And I had a friend who was a little older than me, and she said, sort of frankly, you know, he just doesn't see himself in you. And I thought that was a very powerful thing to recognize in that moment. And it explained a lot, because like, I haven't dropped anything, I'm like on it, but we're just not, you know, whatever. And, you know, it's like, you don't remind me of my wife, you don't remind me of me, I can't like give up, like I can't see myself in your trajectory, like, and I think, you know, since then we've all been taught to be more mindful of that and to be more mindful of other people's journeys and to bring everyone up and of our own biases and your discussions around that and DEI in places and all that stuff. But certainly at that moment, I think I learned that there was that added barrier occasionally and often, frankly, to really connecting in a way that I wanted to with some of the folks above me.
Okay. On that note, so we started here on the personal. I want to go to the organizational. Kamala, so, you know, when we talk about access and how we get to a point where we have authentic, inclusive, representative stories on film and TV, some of those issues are systemic. And I know you're in a role where you have an opportunity, potentially, to address some of that, right? Like you can, from where you sit, help people figure out workflow and approaches that lead us to more inclusive outcomes. Can you just talk a little bit, not so much about, you know, specific things that folks can do, but what's the mindset people should use? Like for you, like what has worked for you in terms of identifying opportunities to do better?
It's a great question. Is my mic on? Are you guys good? Everyone hear me?
I don't know, I can start rapping again.
All right, so everything that we're battling when it comes to this industry and inclusion and representation, it is, not only is it systemic, but it's also has been that way by design. So a big part of why, of sort of when I started at Lionsgate, the early conversations that I wanted to have with our leaders was really about, let's not just talk about the outcomes, let's talk about the design, right? So when we would talk about, you know, putting together a director list and saying like, hey, this director list is not very diverse, you know, you would hear, well, I mean, you know, it's a lot of money that this, you know, this budget is very high. We need to protect the studio's investment. We need to make sure that, you know, we're bringing someone on that has directed, you know, 2 or 3 other studio films, right? And I was like, okay, but just like I do, you receive and you are aware of the diversity stats in our industry. So if you're telling me that someone needs to have directed 2 other studio films, and UCLA's diversity report is telling you that 95% of the directors are either white and or male, you're telling me that you only want to hire a white man. But when you hired me, you said, what I want to do is try to figure out how to hire other people, right? So these 2 things can't coexist. So we can't go back in time and hire more women and people of color 30 years ago, because that would have helped them have 2 studio films by now. So what is the thing that we're going to do now in the present? And I remember when I started talking to some of my colleagues about it, I had done like a 360 assessment with like a career coach, and I got a lot of anonymized feedback. And one of the pieces of feedback was like, I can't believe that you were comfortable to sit in a room of mostly white men and tell them that one of the biggest barriers to inclusion in our industry is that it's mostly run by white men. But for me, I'm like, I didn't even think about that as like a particularly bold or interesting thing to say, it just is. Like I was like, don't they see it as well? I mean, it seems pretty clear, right? And I think that that speaks to sort of like, a lot of my approach is about in a very sort of bringing people in, but we have to talk about what is honestly happening, not what we hope to be happening, and we have to know that sort of the outcomes that we're seeing are the result of all the decisions along the way. So when I came into this role, I really wanted to be focused on the fact that because I'm not into window dressing, like doing the systemic things are harder and they take longer, right? But I was like, you know, this role in this team, of which I have someone on my team who's here right now, I'm on it. This role in this team needs to be embedded into all of the critical decision points along the way that end up resulting in our slate. Because if we're only advising on the marketing side, everyone wants a multicultural marketing POV, right? But you didn't build an inclusive movie, so there aren't really a lot of multicultural like marketing ways in. It's just not gonna resonate with the audience. Then it's sort of like, then you're gonna be looking at the results. Well, I mean, we tried to reach them and it seems they didn't come when it wasn't built for them, right? But if you do the reverse, like we're gonna only have you guys thinking about the creative, and a lot of times that will mean casting, right? It's very easy to count the number of sort of people of different backgrounds on screen, but if you're not thinking about what's happening behind the camera, then the representation is not gonna be authentic, then it's not gonna translate well in the marketing, then you're not gonna get the box office result, and then what's gonna happen is someone's gonna say, I don't know, it seems like casting Black people just isn't really bringing audiences out. But it's like you didn't do any of the other things that should have driven that outcome. So it's harder to be obsessed about all the different pieces, sort of at the director and the producer and the writer packaging, like are we having the conversation? At the casting moment, are we having the conversation? Are we looking at the script? When it goes over to green light, are we in the room as well? When we're talking about marketing, are we also digging into that? But all of those conversations that usually people that look like us are not in are the reason why year after year the stats say what they say.
And so that's where I would say there's also an opportunity, because what we've seen in many instances where, Oscar so White, for example, you see a strong public awareness reaction to the lack of diversity, whether we're talking about women or underrepresented people of color, right? We see this reaction where people say, well, yeah, really, I just noticed that, there aren't enough other people in these shows. And so then there's this kind of short run, concentrated effort, but the development cycle on a movie is what, 3 years?
Exactly.
Something like that? So this kind of short burst of energy and activity and stuff, would be really, really much more effective if there was a long-term organizational structure in place that would actually, help folks create process and workflow so that that added interest will yield actual results, right? Because simply, for example, saying I'm gonna throw money at the problem, knowing what the development cycle is like, is not necessarily gonna get you, when you get to the finish line, to stuff that you all get to see on the screen, right? So the work that you're doing is critical, because otherwise, even good intentions will die on the vine.
Right, because I think that like the thing that was an important awareness point for me was that sometimes the exclusion that is happening is intentional, but oftentimes it is unintentional, right? It is people trying to defray risk by working with things that they feel are tried and true or safe. It's people who want to work with producers, writers, directors they've worked with before. Just like if I could choose, I also only want to work with my friends as well, right? But because we are not the C-suite, when we gather up our friends, it doesn't look like this, right? And that's the problem, right? And so you have to have that awareness of sort of like, how do I make it scalable and how do I not take it personally?
Yeah.
Which is very hard because the exclusion can feel very personal.
Yeah. Now I want to bring Yvette into the conversation in particular because Yvette didn't mess around. She's not waiting on Hollywood. She just went ahead and made her own company, and we're gonna get into that. So one of my favorite expressions is that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. Now, we'll talk about opportunities a little bit, but Yvette has had a lot of preparation. Can you talk a little bit about some of the work that you've done, and kind of how you put yourself in a position to create stories and get them on the screen?
Sure, excellent, thank you so much. Amazing day, by the way, conference. So yeah, I have been a storyteller, visual storyteller from my earliest memories. I grew up drawing, painting, and writing. And it was just the symbiotic relationship of that visual image, word to visual or visual to word. So I was always going to be a storyteller. Born in the Bronx, in the hood. In the hood, so definitely there weren't many role models, if any, really, that I could emulate, or certainly even call a hero that looked like me. But I was just extremely passionate about art and also the power that art actually had. because once I started becoming successful, even in my early years, between the attention and conversations and just different interests that I could call attention to because of my art, I just realized it was incredibly powerful. I just didn't know how I was going to get there. And then, my family had no idea either. So certainly there were many conversations that had to be had, or let's avoid the conversations because we're never going to meet. But regardless, my parents absolutely did, support my choices. I ended up going to NYU Tisch. That was my undergrad, and then UCLA is my grad school.
You see you get some snaps up in the corner over here. You might have a ride home.
There we go. But the journey was definitely off the beaten path. And what I would say is that, I heard earlier in one of the panels is that, you've always been the first. I was the only, not even just the first, but the only, whether it was, even in my various iterations of art school, definitely the only Latina, I would say oftentimes. I also have always had a great passion for technology, so I was able to merge story and technology really, really early on. With some of the, like in the early 2000s, when digital started to become a thing in entertainment. And again, often the only woman, certainly the only Latina, the only person of color having to answer all the questions, by the way. But I just really realized that, actually that gives me a tremendous amount of power. And the fact that people are asking questions is an opening. And then there's also a tremendous amount of pressure with that, right? You have to be the best, always at your best. But I just kept hustling. And it was when I actually became a member of the WGA, was when I became very personally acquainted with the numbers, the stats. And that's when I realized that, the reason why I've had this uncharted path is because of the reality, just the reality of the world, really. Not just the US, but certainly, again, these systems that have been put into place to protect certain people and not everyone else. But again, I was just emboldened by that. It's like, okay, well, regardless, I know the power of the medium, I know the power of the talent, I know the power of the stories that I want to tell that will touch people on a universal level, and no one's gonna stop me, right? So I've always had that mindset, absolutely green light yourself, no matter what, and I've been really fortunate that I do work in what I call old Hollywood, which is getting smaller by the moment. And at the same time, it's just a tremendous opportunity, especially now, to also create your own path. And when I was a grad student here at UCLA at TFT, the School of Theater, Film, and Television, or Television, Film, and Theater, I met my current partner in my new company, Indigo Rain. This is actually my third production company, and with this one, again, we're building a pipeline. So not only are we we have created this, it's a full services production services company where we can take an idea all the way through pre-production, through marketing and distribution, and also offer the various facets of that entire process. Then we also have our own slate, and then there's the client slates. And with that, it has allowed us to build a content fund. We're working with a lot of deals internationally, because then again, you can get away from some of the gatekeeping. It has its own gatekeeping, but it works differently. And it's actually just, again, allowed me to work with old Hollywood. I'm packaging TV shows, I'm pitching TV shows through that pipeline, but a little bit differently, again, going back to creating your own and greenlighting yourself. I'm a really firm believer in establishing your own intellectual property, having ownership of that, having success of that, whatever that looks like, whether it's a proof of concept short or a podcast or anything, really establishing that so then with success, and when you do get in the room, now you have more leverage to negotiate deals that are friendlier and better for you as a creator. So, you know, again, being able to have two different avenues and beyond, but, you know, that old Hollywood model, as well as a new Hollywood model, it's certainly where I live, and I really do believe that that's where our power lies as storytellers, creators, regardless of what side you are on of it. When you're creating your own pipeline, there's just tremendous, you're emboldened, there's tremendous confidence, and when you open up that door and just tell the world, I'm here, anything can happen.
Yep.
I love that. So, I'm gonna ask, the group a question or two, and then I'm gonna leave it to you all right? And, you know, feel free to kind of raise your hands, nod, indicate in some way, circle around, do the hokey pokey, whatever, so I know who to call on, okay? Next question for everybody is, you know, because this question about being in the room, having an opportunity, et cetera. What my observation, and you're welcome to correct me, is that when what I'll call non-traditional folks make content for their cultures or communities, and it's successful, there's every reason under the sun why it's successful, right? So if it's Black Panther, well, it came out just before Avengers Infinity War, and it was this, and it had such and such, right? If it, you know, or if it's Crazy Rich Asians, or, you know, Hantified, or whatever, like, you know, there's always a reason. Well, you know, it's a Netflix original, right? Like, there's always a reason. But if that project is from a non-traditional community and it's not successful, it's because it was from a non-traditional community.
Yeah.
And as a result, you know, because of that perception, as a result, when you do get in the room and you say, okay, well, we really want to do fill in the blank, it's my sense that, and again, welcome to correct me, that it's kind of like ice skating uphill sometimes, because people have a certain degree of skepticism layered on top of their lack of awareness that creates a higher burden for you to get to yes. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that and some of the things that you can do to navigate that and get people to see what you see?
Yeah. I mean, no, I think that's not wholly correct, but it's not wholly incorrect, right? You definitely want, make no mistake, the system has its flaws. It is broken, right, in a lot of ways. The reason, I think, you know, as a person of color, as a Black woman who sits in these rooms, my job always is to advocate for whatever movie I'm working on, right? Whether it's Star Trek, whether it's Children, Blood and Bone, right? And the reason why, and I think, yes, part of the business, a lot of folks, even divisions within companies, can be as reductionist as, well, those groups just don't show up for X movies, right? However, the reason why there should be a push to fix the pipeline is so that there are more bodies that look like myself, more women, more people of color at large, who can reflect different points of views to say, let's have more at-bats for that individual, for that subject matter, for that genre, whatever. Because we see clearly that that happens with non-multicultural filmmakers, non-multicultural subject matters, right? There are lots of stories that are young white boys coming of age, right? I don't know how many I've seen of like young Asian women coming of age, right? And that's largely because there are people in rooms who believe instinctually that people will show up for that kind of movie. If you make it at the right price, if you have the right individuals in it, they will show up for that thing. A lot of our business is, and we've talked about this as well, it's just your instinct. It's what you're fighting for. It's what that person in that room is advocating for. It's what that executive who believes in you, who's put your name on that list, is fighting for. It's your gut. It's what I think people want to see, right? I think people want to see a movie about young black girls in Afro-futuristic Nigeria and will show up for that,
I'll
right?
show for that.
It'll be a good movie. But I might also think that people might wanna show up for young Latino boys, you know, doing X, right? So I don't disagree with, you know, the fact that if something doesn't work, you then, of course, when you get in front of a green light committee, it factors into like the comps for things that did not work, and there's more against you, right? However, my job, sort of the fundamental aspect of it and the frustrating aspect of it too, is that I have to show up, I have to advocate for voices that might be overlooked. And the more there are of me sitting in rooms like those, the less difficult it might be for there to be more at-bats that are not outliers when they succeed and, you know, par for the course when they don't. So that's my.
I was gonna say something similar, because I wanted to affirm what you said, Jay, about sort of like the dichotomy is real, right? And it's exactly what Mika just said at the end, right? If you were a game master in Hunger Games, right, and you wanted to see people really sweat it out, you would design a system where if they succeeded, you said that's an exception, it's not repeatable. And if they failed, you were like, this is exactly what I thought you would do, right? Because every time they're gonna work so hard, and when they actually make Get Out, you're literally told you can't put that on the comp list, because like, what could ever be Get Out? So it is a very interesting design, right? But then here's the corollary that I do think is really challenging as well, right? Because I've asked, you know, certain executives, why is that? Because movies that center white men fail every month of the year for a myriad of reasons, right? Movies fail for a myriad of reasons, and everybody knows that the outcomes on a movie is multivariate, right? It is not just who's in the movie, right? It is who's in the movie, who directed the movie, when did it release, what else was out in the market at that time, what was the sort of like, what was happening in the zeitgeist, was it pro or against that particular theme, like how much did you spend on marketing, all of those things, right? And so you can have a very intelligent and analytical conversation about a movie that centers white characters and why it didn't work. And all of a sudden, it feels like all those other parts of people's brain go offline if the people in it happen to be all women, or if they happen to be all queer, if they happen to be all black. Oh, it was because of that particular thing. And what an executive said back to me was that the reason why I do think the conversation shuts down is because a lot of times for that studio head who greenlit that particular thing that centered women or people of color or whatever it is, part of why they greenlit it was because of the diversity angle. Now, that reveals a lot of things to me. One, it means that like part of the issue is that we have not diversified the set of decision makers. So, because we're not asking for, you know, every once in a while for you to do a social justice like project, right? This isn't philanthropy, right? So it should be pretty regular, right? And it's not, you're not doing me a favor by greenlighting a black film that I was advocating for, so that if it doesn't work, I'm like, oh man, I really pushed the studio to the best. And there are people that think like that, right? But then the other side of it is that we have to continue to push for more and more opportunities, because the reason why we can have nuanced conversations about why a film about a white male lone like Avenger in an action movie worked this time and it didn't work that time is because hundreds have been made, right? We don't have hundreds of anything that centers us in our experience, right? So we only really have, like, maybe we have a sample set of 20 or 30, and like a couple of them are Get Out, and then the rest of them are not, and like that does not a sample make. So you are kind of throwing spaghetti at the wall, right? And so I do think that we have to continue to push for the at-bats even in the face of the prior failure. But does it make it harder? Absolutely. And I think we also have to push ourselves as audience members, because part of what they're banking on is that they expect, sometimes wrongfully, that if there are black people on screen, that I am in their target audience. Sometimes I'm not. There's a lot of things that center black people that like, I'm not particularly interested in that because black is not a genre, right?
Yeah.
There are genres that I like and there are genres that I don't like, right? Asian is not a genre, right? But they are also banking on the fact that if you are a white audience member and you see a screen filled with Asian American faces, you're gonna immediately go, that's not for me. And the problem is that sometimes we give them too much evidence to make those shorthanded decisions. So I think if you are a person in the audience who's like, I want to see more diverse content overall, I would challenge you to think about what are you watching that isn't centered on people from your community. And that's for everybody in the room, because until we do that, it allows people to make those shorthand judgments that sometimes we fulfill. Because if you love R-rated comedies, and then all of a sudden you don't go out and see Joyride, which is a film that we had earlier this year with 4 Asian American actors, they're gonna say, well, I mean, they like R-rated movies, but like only when they're white. And I don't think anyone in here would raise their hand and say, that is the message I'm trying to send to Hollywood. So I think we have to be really intentional about the role that we play as well.
That's good.
Awesome. I mean, what I would say just to begin with is that there always needs to be the will to actually greenlight a project and step out of a box and take what, you know, would be considered in black and white, you know, pun intended here, as a risk, right? And there are, you know, there actually, yeah, I mean, maybe the sample pool is 20 or 30 films, but at the same time, given the changing landscape, continued changing landscape, the compression of the industry and just the continuing growing multicultural state of the world, not even just the US, like, okay, if we're ever going to take a chance, now is the time. And we don't have to necessarily take expensive experiments, you know, so-called experiments. We can actually experiment on, you know, a variety of different budgets and price points. And if we are breaking new talent, whether it's a director or, you know, or an actor, or perhaps we're exploring a subject or topic that, you know, perhaps we haven't explored before, well then, you know, make sure that we're actually now are also bringing onto that project some experienced professionals, but knowing that they are there either in a mentorship kind of position, or that they are also responsible to make sure that this project is going to be as successful as it possibly can. And let's market it properly, and not use the stereotypes that are usually used when we are marketing, right? You know, that has been referenced, but you know, it's really about the will. It's really about the will to say, you know what, we want to expand our catalog, and you know, and understanding and respecting that, you know, the audience is everywhere, the audience is constantly changing. You know, I thought it was a really fascinating presentation earlier about, you know, Gen Z and then Gen Alpha. How are they going to play into this? How are you actually looking at that? And by utilizing the same old formula, you're not going to get there. There's no way. What you've been doing actually isn't working, and everybody knows that. So this is the time actually to do something different, and you know, and certainly it just doesn't have to be that expensive. And you know, I'll actually just even reference with you know, True Detective, you know, Night Country, which you know, HBO actually, I do have to give credit here for HBO, where they stepped out of the box, you know, in terms of not hiring you know, a white male. And in this particular case, but I have a little bit of insider information there, where, you know, this new director, a new voice, you know, a Latina, she was given six episodes as opposed to 8 or 10, and you know, to tell a really huge story. And she, you know, she was called in to, you know, to pitch, to give her take, but she stood up for herself and said, you know what, if you actually want to hire me, you're going to have to pay me. You're not going to take my ideas and basically love my ideas and then not hire me, because that's typically what has occurred. So we also have to take a stand and you know, utilize the numbers where we can, but the numbers have always been there. This is, you know, this is another thing. It's really about the will. Saying, yes, I'm going to make this decision. I'm going to put everything at it to make this project as successful as possible. And you know, you have to make a decision and be bold and stand behind it. And that's what we need to see so much more of, especially as we move forward.
All right, we have about 4 minutes for questions, which is probably like 3 lightning round questions. Let's start in the back. Yes, you with your hand up. Stand up.
Hi, thank you all so much for being here. I'm Jeffrey Sullivan, a second-year MBA student. My question is with the shrinking number of distribution channels, especially thinking about television and home video. Like, are you worried about the ability to get diverse products sold and actually marketed into communities? And like, what your strategies be to solve that?
I can speak to this really quickly, but just one point, because I mostly work in television. And it's interesting, again, during this time of compression, and this is something that we chatted about on our call, is that during these kinds of periods when Hollywood is struggling, they'll definitely look at what we're not going to do, right? And usually the Black shows, the Latino shows, anything that's not white is, definitely, we'll do one. Maybe if we're gonna do anything, we'll do one. And then the other approach is, okay, well, actually, this is a great time to, in terms of a new channel or some experiments on a channel, is that let's make all Black shows, or let's make, Black and Latino shows, because we know that audience will come and watch, and we can build up that channel, we can build up that network, we can monetize, and now especially with Fast TV, I think we're going to be seeing actually quite a bit of that. But then once they build up that network, that channel, that distribution outlet to a level, then come the white shows, and away go the shows of color. So we have seen this historically, and I think it's a concern, at this particular moment. But the reality is that, the audience is craving content. That has not stopped. Regardless of the state of the industry, the audience is there. We've never consumed content more than we have now. So it's really about, again, building your own pipeline. There's so many different choices. If you're not seeing what you want to see, then create your own fast channel. Partner with individuals that are in the distribution place to, again, you just need that one success that you can build upon.